Information security is one of the most important topics in technology today. Is your data secure? Bring Your Own Security Radio is here to help keep you up to date on the latest trends, software, and apps to make sure that your data stays secure. Bring Your Own Security Radio is about to begin. Here are your experts, Dave and Jason.
That's right, I'm Dave.
Yeah, so first, aloha, Jason, David, pleasure to be on the show. My name is Patrick Wardle. I am the creator, the founder of Objective-C, which is a Mac security company. In terms of my background, I started, I guess, at the University of Hawaii, studying computer science. During that time, I did an internship at NASA in California, where I worked at Moffett Field for the autonomous software division. What we were working on was basically testing and kind of exploring the code that was being written for some safety systems on the space shuttle, specifically the Space Shuttle Abort Flight Management System, as well as some of the software that was being written for the Martian rovers, kind of this push towards autonomy in software systems. That was an incredible experience. I learned a ton. I was definitely, I would say, the dumbest person there. I mean, really working with rocket scientists was very humbling, but a great inspiring opportunity.
Yeah, they're great.
I was then hired by NSA, which I always joke is everyone's favorite government organization because I think they're the only ones that actually are listening.
That's right.
And what I did at the NSA was, what I talk about, I first started in IAD, which is their defensive mission, working on analyzing malware that was involved in significant DoD intrusions. So that was cool because I really got to look at reverse engineering some kind of, I would say top grade malware that was written by some very interesting characters. After a time in IAD, I switched sides to kind of the more offensive mission where I was able to work on, let's say, offensive cyber capabilities. After the NSA, I went into the private sector and currently now I'm the chief security researcher at SNOC. SNOC does crowdsourced vulnerability discovery, kind of like pen testing type stuff, but also testing IoT devices. And what I do for them is mostly research, R&D, and then traveling the world talking at security conferences. So I'm incredibly blessed to have this awesome job.
Hey, Dave, do you feel awesome now?
Shut up. I was hoping to edit that part out, that I still felt like insignificant. So now, not only did I get to feel bad the first time he said it, I get to feel bad the second damn time he said it. So yeah, whatever. I have an MCSE and an A+. You just shut up over there. No,
yeah, there you go. A+. That big, right. Mighty A+.
And for those of you listening with that certification, we kid because we all started somewhere. So we are not trying to objectify you in any way.
Now we're objectifying Dave.
Yes, it's just me being ridiculous. So it's all good. All right. So let's see if we can ask another question, and it actually stays on the air. So Patrick, with the things that you are doing today, you clearly had to start somewhere. So what was kind of your first foray into tech, and how did you realize that this was the field for you?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think I took somewhat of an interesting path to kind of get to where I'm at, which I think is part of the reason why I enjoy it so much, and I, hopefully am somewhat successful as well. So, I grew up without really technology. I didn't have a TV, no computer, spent a lot of time kind of out in the woods, reading, playing in streams, that kind of stuff. And I think that really allowed me to kind of develop a more creative mind, per se, which in hacking is, I think, essential, more security research. Because normally when you're trying to audit a system or look for security vulnerabilities, the first step is generally to understand the system, and then you want to kind of find assumptions that perhaps the engineer who secured and designed the system made. And then once you understand those assumptions, it's kind of all about coming up with a creative solution or a creative approach that might break those assumptions or might be something that the original architect did not think. So I think kind of approaching, hacking with this more creative mindset has been, incredibly helpful. So in terms of where I kind of got started, I remember in high school we had, the TI-83 graphing calculators. And I remember programming those in BASIC. And, what we would do is we would build, programs that would do something benign like calculate pi. But in the background, if you entered a certain sequence, it kind of opened this back door, which would give you access to the more powerful programs that perhaps would help you on certain homework assignments or exams. And, the teachers would check for those, but depending on the way you coded that, you could kind of get around some of those checks. I think that kind of piqued my interest in programming and, maybe some recursive type things. Went off to college, kind of studied a traditional computer science degree, but I remember reading about some of the old school virus writers, the VXers, specifically the group 29A. I remember thinking, wow, these are really the most advanced programmers that I know, because they're passionately developing programs that are polymorphic, metamorphic, and at the time they weren't being developed for malicious purposes. It was really just because they were passionately inspired to kind of push the envelope. So that to me was very inspiring and kind of got me interested in, low-level assembly programming, operating system internals, etc. It all really took off, though, at the NSA, because what the NSA does is they offer an opportunity for you to take some incredible training and have some incredible experience on the job that really you probably can't get anywhere else in the world, at least legally. So again, that was really where I feel like I kind of really got hooked, and I really saw kind of my skills or my experience take off. And so I know the NSA can be somewhat controversial, but if you look at it from a purely technical point of view, the opportunities they afford, the internship programs, and all that stuff, it's incredibly helpful. And, that's something I can point to confidently and say, where I am today in terms of my success in the cybersecurity field is directly because of the training and the experience I had while working at the National Security Agency.
Now, usually people look at the bad things, when it comes to NSA, but, my belief is that there's a lot of good people that come out of NSA, and there's a lot of good things that come out of NSA. So, people are always gonna benchmark you on your bad things. So I completely understand. So, what has been your involvement with SYNAC?
Yeah, so SYNAC started, I believe it was, 2013, perhaps, a little over 4 years ago. And at the time, I was looking to kind of get back into the startup scene. The company I had been working for at the time had recently got acquired. And honestly, they were incredibly appealing for a few reasons. The first is they let me work remotely from Hawaii. So I was very stoked on that. Yeah, and then also, I give them a lot of credit because they basically, even though they were a small startup of 5 people at the time, they said, hey, Patrick, we want you to create an R&D branch that does some cool cybersecurity research, but also does a lot of interesting things to get our name out there by talking at conferences, writing tools, talking to the media, which is something you don't normally find in a small startup. So that to me was incredibly interesting, the opportunity. I joined, I believe I was employee number 6, and led the research group. We kind of developed a lot of cool internal tools that we use at SYNAC. For example, some tools that run on jailbroken iPhones that look for vulnerabilities in iOS apps, so kind of some automated vulnerability detection. And then also, their goal for me to talk at a variety of cybersecurity conferences around the world, I was able to do some really cool research with some of my coworkers. For example, we kind of found some security vulnerabilities in DropCam that would let a local attacker install an implant that we wrote onto the DropCam that could be remotely controlled through an app, do things like face detection and, hot miking, really cool stuff like that. And then also all the Mac security stuff I got into, again, was kind of sponsored by them in a way, and, and then I would talk at Black Hat or other cybersecurity conferences about that, kind of as a SYNAC representative. So overall, really awesome experience with SYNAC.
We are talking, for those of you who are just maybe tuning in, you're not 20 minutes late, you're only 10 minutes late today. So we are talking with Patrick from Objective-C. So Patrick, man, so there's so much between your own organization and being either offensive or maybe purple teaming and working with others, or the different things that you're doing. How are you finding time for yourself to continue with your passions? I mean, my understanding is that you really are a driving force within the Mac security world, because most people believe Macs don't get hacked, right? We don't get viruses or anything like that, and you're proving people wrong daily. So where are you finding time to red team and blue team and purple team and pen test and reverse engineer and all the others, these things that you're doing? How is that timeshare really working for you?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because I see, it's definitely something I think a lot of us struggle in the InfoSec or cybersecurity community. It's really tough to kind of maintain this pace or make sure we don't burn out. So first, I think it's something I'm incredibly passionate about. So, it's not something I see as work per se. It's very enjoyable to me. Also, I don't have a lot of responsibilities. I live at home with my dog. So, that in terms of my free time, it's rather copious, which is nice. I can kind of do my 9 to 5, and then also, have some time on nights and weekends, perhaps to kind of dive into the Objective-C stuff. But it's cool because I actually only work part-time, for example, at SYNAC, which then gives me more time to work on Objective-C. And one of the reasons I'm able to do that is there's this kind of funding website called Patreon, which is similar to Kickstarter. But what Patreon does is it allows people to subscribe to creators and pay them some monthly fee. For example, $1, $2, $10. There's various perks that basically people can sign up. And that's something I've created, and it's amazing. I have, several hundred people a month who give, small amounts of money, but that basically provides, consistent somewhat of an income, which has allowed me to kind of cut back on my 9 to 5 job and then more passionately pursue Objective-C, which again is treating these free, a lot of open source tools for Mac users. So, what I do to try to balance everything out, first, as I mentioned, the work for me is really passionate. It's not that stressful. So that's good. And I also try to make sure I balance out sitting in front of the computer, do a lot of yoga. I love to surf. I love to hike. So kind of just getting out in nature, I think, really balances everything out. So while I feel like, I put in a lot of hours between, perhaps SYNAC, Objective-C, and other stuff, it really kind of, at the end of the day, doesn't seem overly stressful or too tenuous.
Man, you're making what, Jason? We got to cut this interview off. He's making it worse. I mean, crap. The guy's out hiking and doing yoga. The rest of us are drinking Diet Dew with the lights half off and getting fat. So I'm just telling you, Patrick. This is. Hey,
you guys, you can come visit anytime.
I was getting ready to kid, and I'm going to shut up because I'll be offended to somebody. But
he's going to be there tomorrow.
That's right. Well, I was going to say I need 2 plane seats, but that isn't really true. But the reality is that you're right, man. What you did, all that stuff you just said, a good chunk of people. Now there might be different. You said you have you and your dog, right? And others might have a spouse of some sort and some kids or dogs as kids or whatever they have, and so things change. But how for you has that how has that helped you grown? I mean, for the youngsters who might just now be getting into InfoSec or vulnerability or bug bounties, and they're trying to figure out how can I make money and how can I have a career but yet still do all this cool tech stuff that I want to do. Where does that balance live, or have you found it 100% yet?
I don't think that's something I figured out 100%. I think, the cliche is life is a journey, and that's true. I think I'm constantly kind of figuring out new things and figuring out what works better and how I can maybe balance out stuff. But one kind of epiphany I had was that it's very easy to get overwhelmed by the field of cybersecurity. And in terms of that, it's just there's so many, say, areas of focus that you can feel like you might need to know all of that. So one thing that I found that has been incredibly beneficial to me is focusing very specifically on one thing, and that currently is Mac security. So, Mac malware and the security of the Mac OS platform. What that means is I don't really analyze Windows malware. I'm not looking for Windows bugs. I'm not doing IoT. I'm not even really looking at iOS apps. I don't do web programming. I know nothing about databases. In terms of cryptography, I know the basics. So I've really found that if you kind of focus on one area, two things happen. One, you don't feel as overwhelmed. And two, you can kind of become somewhat of an expert in that field. And I don't want to say I'm an expert because I feel like I'm learning new stuff every day. But by kind of deep diving into that and gaining knowledge about one specific subject, you can, in a way, maybe stand out and, kind of be seen as, someone to talk to, in your field, whether that's Windows malware, Android security. So what I would recommend is if, you're anyone in the cybersecurity field, maybe feeling a little lost or getting into it and figuring out where should I focus, definitely dabble in all of those. But if you feel an area that's really kind of starting to pull you in terms of your interest and passion, kind of like, focus on that. And even though the other things get really tempting, kind of just maintain focus on that. And I think the dividends of that, again, is, you'll feel a lot more focused, less overwhelmed, and then hopefully kind of start rising and being seen as at least someone somewhat knowledgeable in that area, which will then allow you, for example, to perhaps talk at these cybersecurity conferences, travel, talk to the media, and do maybe the more fun kind of stuff.
Yeah, I find myself, I try and have that type of vision with some things, but they tend to get wider and wider and wider and wider. And then the next thing it's just like, yeah, we do this and this and this and this and this, and it gets a little crazy. So, being that one of your main focuses is primarily Mac OS, could you run us through a scenario of how you might discover a weakness or vulnerability, and what's your methodology for doing so? I mean, do you just do like really new software? Do you hit patches? Do you find somebody, this patch just came out, well, let's see if we can break this. What's the methodology behind the way you would do it?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And first, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this, but I really don't feel like I have a very, I would say, maybe academic or disciplined approach. I'm not really fuzzing anything. I'm not really deep diving too much into specific components. I have an abstract for a talk I want to give at some upcoming conference, which is kind of, I think I'm going to title it like the year of inadvertent security bugs. And, the majority of bugs I find in Mac OS is I'm really like poking on something else. Like, for example, here's a great example, and I'm giving a talk at ShmooCon about this weekend. So I write security tools for Objective-C, and I was writing a tool that needed to monitor process creation so I could track different processes and perhaps detect malicious ones. So pretty standard stuff, and I was talking to the subsystem from user mode that allowed me to do this, and I was running my tool, and when I came back the next day and the system had panicked, and I was like, this is odd. Like, my tool is a user mode tool. Like, it shouldn't, cause a system to panic. So I dove into that, and I actually found that there was an issue in the kernel implementation of some of the interfaces that I was talking to that I just happened to trigger inadvertently because my tool was basically, asking for legitimate information that kind of got the kernel into this weird state. So from then I kind of dug around a little more, and the first thing that happened was I reported this to Apple because it was basically something that could panic the kernel, not really a security vulnerability, but still annoying. I wanted them to fix it so I could use this in my tool. And the way they patched that, I kind of looked at the patch, and it was really funny that the way they patched it. Basically, there was a string which didn't have to be null terminated, and the code was looking for the null and would unfortunately look outside the bounds, which if it then tried to read something outside the buffer that was a not mapped page, it would panic the kernel. So the way they fixed it was to do kind of a stir length kind of check. And, again, the string was not null terminated. And so then they ended up like copying random bytes from kernel memory into user mode. So their patch actually introduced an even worse issue, turning it into a kernel information leak. Another thing I always do, just to kind of get back to your question, is often audit Apple's patches, both for bugs that I report and bugs that other people report. Because I have a handful of CVEs where I have looked at the way that Apple has patched something, and really not to pick on them too much, but they often just patch one specific code path instead of addressing the more systemic problem. So I find a lot of security vulnerabilities, and for example, in the case I just described, their patch actually turned a denial of service, a kernel panic, which isn't really a security issue, into a true security issue, which was turning it into a kernel information leak, which would leak sensitive information from the kernel.
Absolutely.
So, to answer your question just in a nutshell, I like to poke on new features they introduce and try to look at areas that, again, I feel like maybe other people haven't audited or poked at as much. And I think there's, with any system, trying to find the dark corners where other security researchers may not have gone is a lot of times a great place to find bugs.
Right on. So we are talking with Patrick from Objective-C. We are roughly 24 minutes into what should be about a 45-minute interview. And Patrick, every time you say something, I look down at my notes and the questions that I wanted to ask, and I'm like, no, that's too stupid of a question. I don't want to ask that. So you're really you're up in my game tonight because I have to change what I'm going to say. So by comparison, I'm not a complete moron. So I want to both thank you and curse you for that for that bonus to this interview. So you talk about kind of just maybe hitting the periphery and doing some basic things to see what you can find within the Mac, and then like you said, by accident you found something else, something that wasn't a problem that created a problem. I mean, isn't that where most security vulnerabilities are found anyway? You were looking for one thing and you kind of bumped into something else.
Yeah, and I look back at the NSA and I feel like in a way they really corrupted my mind. And I mean this is an ultimate compliment. Like whenever I'm looking at a system or when I'm writing a tool, I always kind of have this offensive mentality. So when I'm writing a piece of software, that's great because I can kind of build in some defensive programming skills, and I like to think that I'm kind of building in security from the ground up because I'm always thinking like, how would I break my tool? So kind of building in those checks. And again, when I'm looking at a system, even if I'm just trying to understand it for the purpose of, maybe interfacing it with it when I'm writing a tool or just to gain some knowledge, I'm always thinking like, what are the assumptions that are made here? And so that's kind of, as you mentioned, a lot of times how I kind of bump into things where I'm like, this doesn't really seem right, or this seems a little off. And then again, just because I'm always kind of focusing on, how can something be exploited or how can something be corrupted, I think that opens up some interesting doors and reveals a lot of times some interesting code that ultimately leads to security issues or security vulnerabilities.
One thing that kind of popped into my mind that, okay, so if you're not comfortable with answering this one, I'm okay with that. But in all seriousness, we've had former NSA and or other three-letter organization members on our show. And so why does somebody become a former three-letter contractor or employee versus staying there and like you said, having access to some of the tools and training and again, notwithstanding any of the political nonsense that could come up. But why would somebody not stay unless you knew that you were going in on a short term and that was just how it was? But is that I mean, for those of us that never have been a part of a three-letter federal agency, some of us think, man, if I had that, I would do this and that, or I'd never leave. And then yet,
Sure.
we hear that a lot. So is there
Yeah,
anything
yeah.
to that you can speak to?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great question because I think that's something that they struggle with as well, because I think they do an amazing job at attracting top talent, do an incredible job training, and then they definitely, I think, have some attrition issues where, a lot of people end up leaving. And, this happens at every company, but, perhaps they struggle with it a little more. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a really excellent question because, some of the things I miss are, one, just being part of kind of the mission. And, depending on where you stand politically, I don't really want to get into that. But, for example, if you're doing, offensive C&E operations against, terrorists, I mean, that's something I think most people can say, okay, hey, that's probably a good mission. There's a lot of people that wish harm against the United States for whatever reasons, again, avoiding politics, who are actively trying to perhaps, hurt American civilians. So again, being part of something that's helping to prevent that, does give a lot of fulfillment. And also, again, just the opportunities of what you get to do in the training is really unparalleled. So the question, as you raised, is why do people leave? And, I think there's a variety of answers to that, probably depending on the individual. One thing for me is it's like a large government organization. Not as bad as the DMV, but again, that's kind of another large organization. So,
figurative statement there.
Yeah. So for me, I remember some of the challenges we had were not technical, like the biggest obstacles, and that was incredible because we were past some very challenging technical problems. So there's just some things. There's a lot of bureaucracy, red tape, and I'll caveat it's real. The NSA, all my experiences, there was a lot of good red tape to make sure people stayed within legal bounds and, did things that were according to the mission, which I think is really important. But there was other things that were just, bureaucratically stifling. The private industry, in a way, I kind of hate to admit this, but, pays a lot better. So for someone who is looking, for example, to maybe start a family, have some kids, maybe wants the husband or wife, one of the partners to stay home. If they're living in the D.C. or Maryland area, that's really hard to do on a government salary. And I know the NSA, I believe, has made strides towards, maybe increasing salaries, but, the private sector is always going to pay more. So for a lot of people, even though they love working at the mission, they want to be able to send their kids to maybe a nicer school or live in a nicer part of the county. So I think that's a challenge as well. And then also working in a classified environment has some downsides. You can't bring your phone. I remember printing out code and locking it in and retyping it, and sometimes that's just really frustrating. But overall, I have just nothing but pretty much fond memories. And like I said, it's an incredible place, I think, to really start off your career. And what a lot of people do is they, leave the agency, but they work as a defense contractor. So in some ways, they're still directly involved, at least with the intelligence community, and they're still benefiting, the nation. They're still working kind of indirectly with these three-letter agencies. So again, just because someone leaves, I don't think that necessarily means they become completely detached from the entire experience.
Yeah. So as far as, especially being specifically Mac, so what do you feel is overlooked in the software security when it comes to Mac?
So, yeah, another excellent question. These are great. First, it's funny. I have this love-hate. I shouldn't say hate. Hate is a strong word. With Apple, where part of me really, I really dislike the fact that they exude the claims that Macs are impenetrable. When we look as recently as 2012, they had statements on their website saying Macs are invulnerable to Windows viruses. It won't get infected with the thousands of viruses that are targeting Windows. And while that's technically true, because a Windows virus is not going to run on Mac, what most people read is my Mac's not going to get a virus. And
Yeah.
Apple thanks us for thinking that, because it definitely sells a lot of products. And what I continually have to remind myself is Apple is a corporation, and this is not some big conspiracy, but corporations are beholden to their shareholders. So at the end of the day, Apple's primary objective is make money. And again, that's not a bad thing. It's just important to remember. Do they care about our privacy? Probably. But I think they like to play up these factors because it makes us feel good about their products. And, for example, if we think these Macs are more secure, we're more likely to buy them. Again, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just important to remember. So
it's just a business.
The downside, yeah, exactly. And I don't blame Apple for doing that, although sometimes I feel it's a little hypocritical, but, whatever. So the downside, though, is that then Mac users, in my opinion, are more vulnerable. Let's, for example, say Windows and Mac, the operating systems are, equally secure. You have Windows users, though, that are very cautious because they continually hear on the news this new Windows ransomware. They've all have friends and families whose Windows computers have got hacked. Just a lot more threats targeting Windows computers. The Mac users, we're a little more smug. We don't think that we can get hacked because Apple has been telling us that we can't, and there's not as much Mac malware out there. So we probably haven't had a first-hand experience with Mac malware. So when we browse the web and we open those emails and we click on those links, we are way overconfident, which then naively puts us in a more vulnerable scenario. And it's interesting because I think that's the biggest risk, at least facing Mac users. And really interesting, we're chatting now because just a few days ago, the FBI released an indictment for a guy in Ohio who had developed a piece of Mac malware called Fruitfly. And I became involved with this because last year I was looking at this Mac malware called Fruitfly. I thought, yeah, this is interesting. I didn't really know any of the backstory. It's just another piece of malware. And I reverse engineered it, said, well, it's got some really cool capabilities. It can turn on people's webcams. It can, capture their keystrokes. It's basically a surveillance capability. And I'm like, These are the type of malware we see perhaps nation states using because, most cyber criminals are just interested in making money, right? Stealing your credit card and, maybe getting your banking credentials. They're not going to write an interactive implant that can move the mouse and turn on the webcam. Got really
some are lazy and will just go buy it,
Yeah. Got really interesting when I found embedded in the malware some backup command and control servers, and I was able to decrypt those URLs, and it turns out those domains were available for registration. So I registered those, and I started logging connections. And what the malware would do is it would connect to the command and control server and send the name of the computer and the name of the user who was logged in. So, for example, if I was infected, you would see an IP address from Hawaii, and you would see Patrick Wardle's MacBook is the computer name, and Patrick is the user. So very easily you could Google and then figure out who I was and then likely identify the victim. So I was able to identify hundreds of these victims, and at that point I saw, hey, they're all pretty much U.S. citizens, and this is weird. So contacted the FBI, handed this information off. Turns out they already had an active investigation on this malware, and turns out what was happening, as we now know in the indictment, they're allegedly, the guy they caught had developed this malware which was largely targeting Mac computers, and for the last 13 years, allegedly, had been spying on a large range of victims. And unfortunately, the goal of this malware was predominantly to spy on people for rather perverse reasons, and unfortunately, he was targeting a lot of kids. So this is an example where I would guess most of these victims who are Mac users were not aware that such a threat like this would exist. And if they would, they would have probably covered their webcams, maybe not let their kids take the computers into the bedrooms, those kind of scenarios. So I think that's something that I'm very passionate about, is that just educating Mac users to realize that these threats are out there, that, it's not just the cyber criminals who are trying to steal your credit card, which is annoying but really doesn't impact your life. There's these, creepy guys who for perhaps decades have been basically spying on children through the webcams of Mac computers. And something like that can have emotional impacts and really just, it's just even difficult to talk about. So, that's something I think just Mac users should be aware of, just realize that these threats that are out there. And again, not to pick on Apple too much, but I feel, they're somewhat responsible, at least some capacity, in kind of, again, perpetuating this these claims that Macs are so secure, which then leads to more vulnerable Mac users.
That's that's exactly right. People just don't think about it, and I jokingly tell people all the time, if you want to just turn it on, plug it in, and use it, you don't want to think about technology, or you're not tech savvy, buy an Apple product, because that's what they do. And if you want something else where you have to put forth a little bit of effort, go buy yourself a Windows or an Android, because then you got to put forth effort in keeping everybody else out of it. So,
and if you really want to work, you just download Linux and throw it all away.
That's right. It is, what time is it here? It's 9:48 in the East. We're going to run a little bit long tonight because we had technical issues early, but we are talking with Patrick from Objective-C. Patrick, as we get down to these last couple of questions, and in no particular order, but clearly you've got a bunch of education. You've got some masters, you went to Johns Hopkins, you went to, in Hawaii, you went to college. And so you're clearly not just sitting in a dark basement trying to read PDFs and the Anarchist Cookbook. But where are we today in that fine line between you've got to have a college education versus if you just put forth some effort, you can gain enough experience to be effective in this field? Is there an even battleground there, or is it really just going to depend on what side of the fence you live on?
Yeah, another super excellent question, because I can kind of see both sides. I mean, one of my neighbors, not even sure he graduated from high school, but he's an incredible individual, and he does, kernel development and OpenBSD, probably like one of the most brilliant guys I know. So I think that's an example of someone who doesn't necessarily need an education per se, and their accomplishments basically have allowed them to be incredibly successful. Me, on the other hand, I was one of those kids in college that had to study to get good grades. Like, generally, I think I picked up things relatively quickly, but I still really had to put in a lot of effort. So for someone like me, the more traditional education, I think, was really, really helpful. Taught me a lot of the foundational stuff, college, learning about operating systems. I would take classes that I didn't even really think they were that interesting. I remember I took this, statistics class, and I was like, oh, my God, shoot me, this is the most boring thing. And then I was writing a tool for one of my Mac security products, and I said, hey, and this is not a novel idea. Other people have done this as well. I was like, look, we can detect binaries that are packed by, basically looking for binaries that have high entropy. And what I mean by that is kind of a large number of unique bytes. So a normal executable is going to have a lot of zeros and padding. It's going to have distributions that match common, for example, Intel instructions, et cetera, et cetera. But a packed executable is going to have a large chunk of the binary that's going to look essentially random. So what we can do is we can do some statistical analysis on, a set of known legitimate binaries and find out what the entropy of those are. And then for outliers, those are probably going to be packed. So now we can generically detect packed binaries, which is usually an indication that it may be malicious because a lot of malware packs itself, or at least something that should be looked at closer. So, for me, in retrospect, that statistics class came back and provided me a ton of abilities and use cases, which then allowed me to develop some kind of neat tools. So I think that's an example where education is awesome. It provides us kind of, maybe a more well-rounded approach to things. I also remember taking some writing classes in college and not really being stoked on them, but now I love to write blogs, I love to talk at conferences, and I can kind of look to those classes as giving me a lot of foundational stuff. I think a lot of people pick up education, pick up skills naturally, but for many of us, you have to be taught. So I think it's really a balance. I mean, I have some friends who went to Ivy League universities, paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, and now we're basically all equal in terms of our capabilities and the work we do. So I really don't think it matters where you go to college. I would say college education is generally a good idea. There's still a lot of employers that look to having a degree, and I think what they do is they look and say, look, this means that this individual can, commit to something, for example, for 4 years and see something through to get a degree. So even if they didn't necessarily learn a ton, they have that commitment, that drive, which, is understandably a valuable trait for a potential employer. So, I think it's important to have those education, but especially in terms of computer security, there's so many amazing resources on the internet. A lot of conferences post their talks online, and, that's the kind of content they're not going to teach anyways in a university. So just to wrap it up, it's like I feel like I learned a lot of good foundational stuff, how to program, and how to maybe write in my college education, but that was definitely complemented by, reading the nerdy books, listening to the conference talks, and really kind of passionately pursuing that on my own.
Nice.
So, getting down to some of the last questions here, what really grinds your gears about Mac? Basically stating, what is something that you would change in that OS if you were able to do it?
Yeah, that's a great thing because, I definitely I always joke I've drank the apple juice. I love Apple products. I'm talking on an iPhone, I got the Apple headphones, I've got several Macs, I've got an Apple TV. So I'm very appreciative of the products and the ecosystem that Apple has built. In terms of Mac OS,
flames.
Yeah. I think the operating system is seemingly lagging in terms of security. You look at recent versions of Windows, they have some incredible exploitation mitigations built in. They kind of, it seems, are building security into the ground up. I think Windows really got hammered in the late 90s and early 2000s and kind of had a come to Jesus moment. And I'm not sure Apple has had that. A lot of times, like I mentioned, the patches, you look at the patches or some of the bugs I find, and I'm just incredulous. I am, have a lot of experience finding bugs, but other people are finding, for example, the bug that you could log into the root account with no password, like the I am root bug. That just, to me, is okay, there's some missing QA testing, security testing, something. And, one thing that I'm somewhat passionate about is the fact that Mac does not have a bug bounty program. And that, to me, is really interesting because you look at Facebook, Google, Windows, even iOS. If a security researcher finds a bug and reports it to the vendor, they can receive some financial compensation. And I think that's a great idea because what it does is it encourages these external security researchers to audit the systems because they know that their time will be, somewhat accounted for. So I'm really surprised that Apple does not have this bug bounty program yet. And then for me, it's not about the money. I would love to obviously get some bounties from that. I'd like to think that I would donate those to charity. For me, again, Apple always says, Patrick, you're just, trying to get more money. And I just laugh and I'm like, no, guys, this is a great way to basically complement your internal security. And as we see, so many of these Mac bugs that are being found are very low-hanging but still very serious bugs, for example, logging in without a root password, that perhaps having more external security researchers who are involved in a macOS bug bounty program would help find those bugs. So that's something that, I would say grinds my gear a little bit.
The money never hurts.
That's right. But,
yeah, true.
Right on. So it is 9:55 in the East. Patrick, we're going to have to let you go. But before we do, is there any topic that we didn't bring up tonight somehow that is passionate for you or something that you wanted to talk about? And along those same lines, make sure that you tell people if they want to reach you, all the things that you're involved with and how they can reach out to talk to you.
Yeah, so obviously I'm very passionate about Mac, and I find a lot of security vulnerabilities and issues, but I really like to also think that I strive to be part of the solution as well. So we kind of touched on Objective-C. So I just want to end about briefly talking about that. And I really hope this doesn't sound like a sales pitch because, again, all the tools are free and a lot of them are open source. So really, I kind of had this epiphany that I love my Macs. I travel with them. I take them to, Russia and China, and I'm always kind of concerned that they're going to get hacked. And, all the security tools that were out there were pretty easy to get around. So I really, first and foremost, wrote some to protect my own computer and then figured, sharing is caring. So, listeners, if you're interested in Mac security, check out objectivec.com. That's objective and then -SEE, kind of a play on words of Apple's programming language. And what you can find there are tools that are designed to generically detect malware. For example, one will tell you if and what is using your webcam or mic. So, for example, if this fruit fly malware had infected your mic, what the attacker actually did is he would wait, allegedly, until the user was not in front of the computer and then turn on the webcam, because obviously the LED indicator light would come on. So he would try to capture people, in various states with, maybe not as much clothing on, et cetera, et cetera. But again,
they don't want to see me.
I wrote. Yeah, you never know. So again, like one of the tools I wrote, it would, tell you when you came back to your computer, hey, while you weren't here, this program turned on the webcam and was recording. So that's kind of the underlying, I would say, characteristics of my tools, is they look for malicious characteristics or actions as opposed to pinpointing malware per se. Another one looks for the rapid creation of encrypted files by untrusted processes, which is ransomware, right? Legitimately, there's not going to be a lot of software on your system that's rapidly creating encrypted files. And if it does, it's probably something legitimate. So I have a very simple tool that looks for, again, the creation of encrypted files by untrusted processes, and then it can generically detect and block, all publicly known Mac ransomware. So if you're interested in Mac security, definitely check out the site. I also blog about bugs I find. I love to analyze all the Mac malware samples that come out publicly. So yeah, it's really kind of my passionate side hobby. So again, if you're interested in Mac security, I would definitely check it out. I really appreciate that.
Right on. And I know that you can find him on Twitter at Patrick Wardle. That's where I found him. And you are going to be speaking at some conferences in 2018. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm talking at ShmooCon this Sunday. I'm going to be talking about some of the auditing subsystems on Mac OS, how you can use them to analyze malware, write security tools, and then some of the security flaws I found and how Apple tried to patch them. I'm also then going to be talking at Syscan 360 in Singapore, talking again about some interesting Mac security vulnerabilities, and then at Opcode in Dubai. So that's kind of the spring conferences. I also like to try to talk at Black Hat and DEF CON, so I have some cool new research that I'm working on, and fingers crossed submit a talk to them and get accepted. But I always love chatting with people at conferences, so if any of your listeners or even you guys, are at one of the conferences, come say hi. I feel like I'm super approachable. I love to kind of geek out with you all, so don't be shy.
Nice. Well, I did not get to see you at the last year's 20th anniversary, but I was out there as media, and even though I'm truly in the field, and I joke about being a lesser than, but unfortunately being out there as media did not allow me the opportunity to schmooze as much as I wanted to. I had to spend more time, catching up to people and trying to interview people that were nowhere near as interesting as you. So my apologies for them if you felt like I'm talking about you, but you probably know who you are. Some of you people.
Way to go.
Well, you know what? Sometimes when you get a media pass at one of these events, right? Every Joe and their brother wants to get in front of you because they think you're going to give them all this free publicity. And you're like, okay, I'll talk to you. And it's 15 to 30 minutes worth of a sales pitch. And then when you actually ask them a technical question, they can barely turn on their Mac or their iPhone, or they're like, oh, a password? What's that? And it's like, I just want to strangle the crap out of you. So, so I found myself last year just inundated with the salespeople of the technology world, and I vow to absolutely never do that again. The only people I will interview at a Black Hat, a DEF CON, or any of these other cons that I might attend will be presenters and researchers and people like that, people that actually are doing it and not selling it to you, because that just
Technical folks.
It wasted a week. It was an absolute waste of a week. So I apologize to the 9 of you who I'm talking about you, and that's okay because you're never coming back. You're never coming back on my damn show anyway, so it's okay.
You heard it first, folks.
That's right. Is that direct or not? I apologize. That's I don't normally get
Good
that.
to be direct.
I don't mind usually get that abrasive, but Oh my God, that was like literally like
Brought out the worst, Dave.
It's 5 days of my life I can never get back. So I can't imagine how much fun it is for somebody like Patrick to go and to a Dubai or even to ShmooCon, which is right down the road from you, Jason.
It is.
It's right down the road. So maybe he should just come sleep on your couch or something. I don't know, but yeah. But to be able to go and know that as a presenter, you're going to have people come up and talk tech with you, right? You're not going to have. Well, I don't think that you're normally going to have the sales rep for some SEIM company coming up and saying, "Hey, you want to promote my stuff for me?" And I don't know. Yikes.
Yeah.
That was crazy. That's why I like doing, talk. I get to do talk on via the internet. I get to say what I want, and then when we edit some of this stuff for broadcast onto iHeartRadio, I'm not allowed to be too mean, and I'm not allowed to cuss. But otherwise, they still let me say what I want to say. So at least I get to still have fun. So, but Patrick, thank you so much. For everybody listening, we again apologize for the first 11 minutes being whatever problem that was. I think it was the aliens or the NSA trying to stop us from talking to Patrick. So, but for all of you guys that stuck it out with us, and I want to say thanks. And we will edit that garbage out of the podcast itself, so you won't hear all that the non-nonsense because you didn't hear anything. So. All right, Patrick, thanks again, buddy. We appreciate your time. We'll see you. If we don't see you at ShmooCon, we'll certainly see you at Black Hat.
Aloha, guys. Again, thank you so much for having me on. Super awesome to chat with you. And, we'll see you around.
All right, thanks, buddy. Appreciate you.
Thanks, bye.
All right, bye-bye. All right, Jason. Man, God, we got to quit. I'm going to find somebody stupid in this field. I know that's going to be hard to find, like, stupid InfoSec people. But I think I may have to interview myself. I may have to have you interview me just so that, I'm like, look, dude, I've got 13.
I'll get through 4 questions, and I'm like, yeah, I got to travel to work tomorrow, D.C.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, well, crap now. I mean, I feel pretty good about myself. I've got 13 certifications, and I just got that CISSP, and I put that crap all over LinkedIn and Facebook, and actually,
bam,
my stuff came today. My welcome kit actually showed up in the mail today. But yeah, so I get all this cool stuff, and then he's like, well, I did a little bit for NASA, and I did a little bit for the NSA, and I only got 2 masters. I got tired of working on my 3rd. I'm like, well, how's the weather in Hawaii?
There you go. So fine, how do you do?
Oh, that's right. So, yeah.
Took the wind right out of your sails, didn't it?
Well, and next week's interview gets no better. Now, just for everybody's knowledge, we pre-interviewed. She was not available to us, but just to give you a teaser, she is one of the top female CISOs in the world, not in the country. She travels around the world at invitation: Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Berlin, the UK, Australia. She travels worldwide because people want to hear what this woman has to say. And she was not available to be with us live next week, so I was able to take 30 minutes and pre-interview her. So next week, Jason and I will be here live with you, but the interview itself will be pre-recorded. But if you ever wondered, can a female be a CISO or be respected or lead the way? Next week may be an eye-opener for you because, again, after about 5 minutes of talking to her, I thought, well, crap, here's another interview that I'm underqualified to do, I think. So it's amazing.
You were ready to hang it up, weren't you?
I'm going to have to quit early because, when I was doing my other show, Dave the IT Guy, I could pick and choose my people. And I wanted this particular podcast to be, more of value, more people that actually knew what they were talking about and people that were going to be useful to our listeners. And
be careful what you wish for.
Well, I'm realizing that at the end of the day, we should just probably shut up, say here they are, and just let them talk.
It depends.
There you go. We finally got an "it depends" in too. So we're up to number 5.
There you go.
Yeah, no.
I threw that in as a freebie.
That's right. That's right.
Just in case anybody's paying attention.
That's right. It's amazing, though, and I kid. I don't doubt myself. I don't doubt Jason and our skill set. We certainly are in the InfoSec world ourselves, and we have to protect our companies just like the rest of you have to protect your companies. So, it's just me trying to be funny and not taking ourselves so seriously and having fun with this show. But the reality is we've had some great guests already, and we've got some great ones lined up in the next 20-some weeks. So if you miss a podcast, that's an hour that you're going to wish you didn't miss. And just remember, you can download us off of iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher. Crap, I forgot half of them already. But just go to bringyourown.security.net, and we even have an embedded player right there on the website. You can just pick from any of the Bring Your Own Security and some of the old Dave the IT podcasts. So join us again next week, next Thursday, 9 p.m.
Same bat channel.
That's right. Jason and I will be live. We'll have our guests with us, and we'll have you all, 104,000 of you that were here last week. Hopefully you stayed this week and even more.
Maybe it's 200,000.
That's right. So thanks again, Jason. I guess we're out of here. It's about the end of our time. So I'll say good night, and Jason, good night to you,
all right.
Sir.
Good night.
Thank you for listening to Bring Your Own Security Radio. Join us every Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for a new episode. Find us on Facebook and on Twitter at BYOS Radio, or find us on the web at bringyourown.security.net. Safe browsing, everyone.